Okay, here we are. It is 10 to 1, June 7th, 2014. And this is tape 1 of Kelly Limes Taylor's dissertation recordings. Okay? Are we
Okay.
ready? Okay. Could you please tell me who I'm talking to?
My name is Veronica Limes.
Oh,
Yeah, whole name.
And where are we? Like, where are we now?
We're at your house in
Mhm.
Atlanta, Georgia. You want the address?
No, no,
Okay.
because that's weird.
Yeah, we're in your house in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, and then we're very specifically in my room.
Yes.
So there might be some ambient noise from the lawnmower going,
The
because Gary's
kids.
cutting the lawn, the kids,
Drinking water.
the dogs
Yeah.
may say something sooner or later once they notice that Gary's out there. So we'll do our best and maybe take some pauses.
Okay.
It might get too loud in a minute. But as you know, the reason that we're here is to talk about your mom and your mom's academic history, like what you know of her in school, and then also how that history may have affected you.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that this might be weird, but I would like to actually start with you first and just kind of your life history. So can you just explain what education means to you, first of all?
That's an interesting question. I never thought about what education means. I know for some people, education means advancement. But I never looked at education like that. I always looked at it as gaining more knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So it may not have led to a specific job. Like my education, my college degree did not lead me to a specific job.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a way of gaining more knowledge and I guess getting smarter.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it means to me.
Now, how is that the same or different than schooling or school?
It's the same because you go to school to gain more knowledge. To me, education is not a means to an end. You know, like people who are going for doctors, there's an end to that. You know, a lawyer, there's an end to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess if you're going for a specific type of degree, then there is an end goal.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going just for a general education, then it's just there to help you in your work, because the more you know, the better you are at what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But just to be a more well-rounded individual.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people say that, you know, they can get that just by life.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the more you know educational-wise, because then you'll read more and you'll learn more and you want to experience more and see more and learn more. Mm-hmm. So it puts a desire in you to learn more.
Mm-hmm. And so so in that way, just from what you're saying, you very much link education and schooling. Like
Yes.
That's where you get an education, is school.
For the first part of your life, then after that you get your education from life.
Mm-hmm.
And self-reading and self-taught. That schooling will birth in you that thirst for more and more knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So if you enjoyed school, then you'll enjoy reading and you'll enjoy visiting museums and you'll enjoy, you know, like last night I was watching on TV the thing about Normandy,
Mm-hmm.
about World War II, because this is the 70th anniversary. So just to sit and hear the history of what those men went through 70 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Some people who don't want to increase their knowledge, they would just change the channel because it doesn't mean anything to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think schooling and education puts a thirst in you to learn more,
Mm-hmm.
to experience more.
Mm-hmm. And where did that idea come from? do you think?
I guess from my parents, because they were avid readers, both of them. And even though Daddy only went to, he had to get out of school very early because his dad died when he was a little boy. He was still a self-taught man, so for him, reading and knowledge and and it wasn't like he was reading big masterpieces. He liked reading Western comic books. But he was able to pass the civil service test. For a man that didn't have an education was very important to him. And so reading, cliche, reading is fundamental. That's how it was. So the more you read, the more you learned. Even if you were just reading romance novels or you're still reading, and it's increasing your vocabulary more than anything. So
how far do you know that your father went in school?
I think it was only to second grade, if I remember correctly. From what I've heard, I think that's where he had to stop. So back then, in order to get civil service, I don't think, there was no GED or anything like that. I think he just had to study to pass that exam. Because there were a lot of people back then who didn't finish school. They didn't go past 8th grade. They didn't get high school diplomas. And so, but just learning was always important to him.
Did he talk to you or you and your siblings about reading in particular?
No.
Or anything like that?
With him, it was just watching him. It was watching him more than anything, because he was always reading. I know he used to complain he didn't like Mom reading the paper before him, because he used to say she read the words off the pages, and when he get it back, when my mother read a paper, it was in shambles when she finished, because so he didn't like reading the paper after her. But he was just an avid reader.
Did anybody in your house, do you remember, read to you when you were younger?
I don't remember. I just remember going to the library. We got a library card as soon as we could, and it was several blocks from our house, but my baby sister and I, we used to walk to the library all the time, and we'd go get books and bring them back and read them and take them back. So from a very young age, we used the library. But I don't remember when I was little if anybody sat and read books to me. I don't remember that.
But you do remember going to the library.
Oh yeah.
Going to the library. And what's the time period, and where was that? I know.
Oh, but the time period, well, the library was in New York on 124th Street, and we lived on 116th Street. So it was in elementary school. We used to walk, because in the heat of the night, the movie came out back in the 60s with Sidney Poitier. The books came out first, and I read that whole series. In the heat of the night, They Call Me Mr. Tibbs. So I would walk to the library and get those books and come back and read them. So I must have been in maybe 5th grade. Because I started school in 58. So 5 years later would have been in the early 60s. So I think because I was in elementary school. So, and our elementary school went up to 6th grade back then. So it was in there, 5th, 6th grade, we used to walk to the library.
That you were doing. So then what about your mom? Talk about your memories or your thoughts about your mom and reading, or Nana and reading. You talked about the newspaper.
The newspaper, yes, she used to read. She didn't read books as much as my father read books. I just remember she always had a newspaper she was reading. I don't remember that we did used to get Life magazine, because that was Life was big back then. So we got Life. Trying to think if we got Ebony. I don't know if we got Ebony, but we got Life. So I remember we used to get Life and read that. But I don't remember her sitting down and reading books. That I don't remember. But newspapers, yeah. The New York News and the Post, she was always reading. Mm-hmm. And then with my older siblings, they used to get the New York Times. Mm-hmm. So that was in the house too. And
your older siblings, while they were living in the house,
yeah, used to get the New York Times. And the New York Times was the paper that high finance people read and well-educated people read. That was, just the average Joe did not read the New York Times. They did. But my older siblings, my brother Ferdy, he always had a Times, and people read it on the train, and you learned how to fold it. And that was one of the things when I was in high school. In one of the classes I took, it wasn't English. I don't know whether it was, I don't remember the name of the class. But one of the things we had to do was get a subscription to the New York Times. And in this class, because the Times is a big paper, they taught you how to fold the Times. I don't know whether the class was civics. They taught you how to fold it so that you could read it comfortably because it was a big paper. So you'd fold a page, fold it in half, fold it in quarters, so you could read that column. And so, yeah, they taught you, but we had to get a subscription to the Times in this class, and we had to sit and read it and discuss what was in the paper.
And so, just for a second as a side note, tell me about, like, in that class, in particular, like, in that class, what did the teacher look like? What did the students look like?
I don't remember. I do not remember. Now remember when I went to high school, I went to a high school that was, because that wasn't high school. I don't think that was junior. That may have been 9th grade in junior high school. That may have been 9th grade. And it was in Harlem, so the school was predominantly black. I don't even think, because there were a lot of Latinos, I think the Latinos went to the other junior high school. It was predominantly black. The majority of my teachers were white, of course. And that class, because I was in a program called Upward Bound, which was for students who were going to go on to an academic high school. In New York, we had various kinds of high schools. You had an academic high school, which prepared you for college. You had a commercial high school. So when you came out of there, you were ready to go into workforce. That taught you secretarial skills. Back then, secretaries took shorthand and typing. So you went to that high school, and 2 of my siblings went there, Terrell and Sonia. Then you had high schools that were food and trade or industrial, so when you came out, you could come out, it taught you how to cook or how to do auto stuff. So when you came out, you had a trade. So back then, the only school you came out of and didn't have a trade was an academic high school. So because I was in this program letting me know I was going into an academic high school, in 9th grade they wanted to teach you about the world, and they used the New York Times so that you were more aware of what was going on in the world and how to advance academically. They made sure your GPA and your, I guess, mental capacity, if that's what you want, or your level of understanding was such that you could handle the academic high school.
And do you remember the name of your junior high?
It was James Fenimore Cooper, junior high school number 120. All of our schools had numbers except for the high school. So my elementary school was PS 103, public school 103. And the junior high school was 120, James Fenimore Cooper.
And then the high school
was Seward Park High School,
which was not in your neighborhood.
No, it was in Lower Manhattan. And it was one of the high schools you had to test to get into. There were several of those. And when you lived in New York, you could go to any high school in any of the boroughs. You didn't have to go, and most of now there was a high school maybe 20 blocks. I don't know if it was that far from me. What was the name? Franklin. I forgot the name of that high school. And that also was an academic school, but they had a program that was slightly different than the academic high school that I went to. You didn't have to test to go into that high school. So Seward Park, you had to test to get into it academically. Now, 3 of my other siblings went to Seward Park, and I don't know if at the time they went, they had to test. You can ask. It was Verna, Ronald, and TJ. They all went to Seward Park. So when you talk to them, you can ask them if they had to test. So you had to have a certain grade level in order to get into it. And that was in Lower Manhattan, near Chinatown, Little Italy. And my high school was about 90% Chinese. And the other 10% was African American, Latino, and white. But it was an academic high school preparing you for college. When you came out of there, you were going into college.
Now,
So that was it.
when you finished, did you move on to college?
Yes. I went to Bronx Community to 2-year. And because I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. So I went to 2-year and got my 2-year degree. And then from there, I moved into Bernard Baruch College, which was down in Lower Manhattan, 23rd Street, because I wanted to major in psychology. So I went there to do psych courses. And I was working while I wasn't working when I was at Bronx Community. Yes, I was. I was working at Merrill Lynch, because I started working for Merrill Lynch when I was in high school. And so I worked also while I was going to school, both of them.
Oh, I thought you were
No. Well, at Baruch, I didn't finish it. I stopped 1 semester short of my degree, because by then I was tired of school and I was failing my major, my psych classes. So I stopped going 1 semester, and I remember Ma was so upset because I was the first child to go straight from high school into college. Sonia did it a year after me, but Sonia didn't complete. And she was upset, and I always promised her I would go back. And when you and Jason were little, I did. I went back to Delaware State and changed my major to business administration and accounting, and got my 4-year degree from there.
Now, when it came to your going to college, what did that process look like, going from high school to college? So
Well,
how
I
did you
remember-
apply?
I remember going into high school, Ronald helped me a lot with the preparation going into high school. And I don't know if that's because Ma wasn't feeling well. I don't know why he was so active in that. But he took me down to Seward Park, and he helped me making sure the classes and everything that I was taking. And then once I got in there, Ma would go over my schedule for the next year and everything.
So Uncle
like
Ronald
that.
helped you get.
He would
get
take me
situated
down
for
to
high
Seward
school.
Park. Yeah, he helped me get situated for high school because I had to go down there to test and everything like that. And he was the one that
Oh, I
took
see.
me down there to get all of that taken care of. And the summer before that, I was a part of a program, and I don't know whether it was to help black kids. Because my memory is very sketchy about this, but it was a private school in Manhattan that I used to go to take classes. I don't know why, Kel. I don't remember. But I know I used to go down to, it was an all-white private school, and I'd go down there. And then,
30 since Miles has got his answer.
okay.
Okay.
So I was part of this program. I don't know how, I don't remember how I got chosen. I don't know if I don't remember how I got chosen for the program. Then I was also part of a program with MetLife, where I used to go down to the MetLife building, and they would teach us. I don't even remember what they taught us, Cal. I don't remember whether it was about life insurance or if it was a schooling. And I don't know how I got chosen for these programs. I don't know if it was because of my GPA, and that's why, was it the Rupert School? That comes back to me. So it was a school I had also applied for when I was in junior high school. They had me apply for that school, also Seward Park. But I ended up going to Seward Park because financially I couldn't have gone to that school. But I guess because of my GPA, and I guess they wanted to help, black kids from Harlem, I was chosen for several things like that. But I ended up at Seward Park.
And so when you were going to these different programs before you started at Seward Park, how old were you?
Well, I was 14 when my dad died, and I was in 9th grade. So I would have been 14, 15, somewhere in there.
So was this when you were in these programs, was this before or after your dad passed?
He passed in October. It seemed to me like it was after he passed. If I remember correctly. I don't. My memory is bad back then. So it seemed to me like it was after he passed. That year after he died was a rough year. So a lot of it I don't remember.
So what you were talking about, Nana being involved, like once you got into, were you saying once you got into Seward
And I guess
Park?
because Seward was so far downtown, that's why Ronald took me, because he knew where it was, and he knew how to get me down there by train. Because, Mom didn't really travel that far, and I didn't know where it was. So I think that's why he took me, because he could get me there by train. But then after that, as far as academically, yes, she was very involved, especially with math, because my mother loved math. So she helped me with my algebra in junior high school, my trig, my geometry, my calculus. She was very active in my math during high school because she helped me understand it. What I didn't understand, she could explain, even after all these years later. Because you remember, she was 42 when she had me. So you add 16 to 42, you know how old she was when I was in high school. And her mind was sharp with her math. Her method, she did it different than the way they taught us in school. So she did it her way and got the answer. And then we worked backwards so that I could do it with the method they taught me to come up with the same answer she had.
So did she ever try to teach you her method? Or
She did, and I could do her method, but I knew I had to do it the way the school taught.
Right.
Because when you do your math, you have to write out, your problems. So it had to look like what they were teaching us in school. But yeah, I learned her method to come up with the correct answer.
Right.
And then
So then did you feel like you knew the method, or like that you knew the method and like you were doing two things at the same time?
But once I understood how to get the right answer, and then she plugged it into what I had to do in school, then it was easy for me to understand it. You understand? Because her method was simple. And then she put her method into the complicated one, I guess, if that makes sense. Once I knew the answer I was going for, then I could figure out how to get to that answer. And then I better understood the equation or what I had to do. Yeah.
So her method was not easy, but simple.
Simple.
Like it was an understandable method.
Yeah.
The school, did you feel like it was an understandable method?
Not in the beginning, because of course I did not like math.
Right.
But when you're dealing with a mathematician who loves math,
Right.
That wasn't me.
Right.
I was in these classes because That was part of my academic career.
Mhm.
But I loved algebra.
Mhm.
Now, when I got into geometry and trigonometry and calculus,
Mhm.
sine, cosine, angles, no. That was
Mhm.
not my forte.
And when you got to those levels, was Nana still good
Oh, yeah.
at it?
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
She never lost it.
Mhm.
Even years later, she helped Ronald's daughter Linda with
Mhm.
her algebra. You know how old she was, but she retained that math. She retained because she loved math.
And what would you, when it came to math, did you think? Now looking back, would you say that she was a good teacher of
Oh,
it?
yeah, yeah. She taught math better than she did reading. Because when she taught us reading, we had to sit between her legs,
Mhm.
and you held the book in your hand.
Mhm.
And as you're reading, she's looking over
Mhm.
at the book.
Mhm.
And sometimes she's combing your hair while you're reading.
Mhm.
And when you get to one word, you don't know it, she look over and she tell you what the word is. When you get to it the second time, if she had the comb, she was going to knock you in your head with the comb. If she didn't, she took her knuckle.
Mhm.
And she knuckle it in. Well, by the time you got to the third time, if you didn't, you're ducking because you know what's going to happen. But by the time you got to the third time, you knew that word because you didn't want that knuckle to hit you.
Mhm.
So you sat and she taught us how to read. Yeah.
Okay. So did you, when you're remembering it, how did you, because her teaching you to read happened much earlier than when she was teaching you the math stuff. But so those are two different time periods I know that we're comparing. But what was her attitude when she was teaching reading versus when she was teaching math, would you say? Or like, what was the feeling that you...
I think with the reading, she seemed to get frustrated more because she felt you should know that... Ow, I knuckled my head. I think she felt you should know that word sooner than you knew that word. Where when she was teaching me the math, she was much more patient with the math than with the reading.
Did she work with you with math when you were younger too? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I don't remember. My other siblings were still there when I was growing up, so they may have helped me with my math, learning my times tables and everything and quizzing me. I don't remember if she helped me much with the math.
But she was the one that worked with you with the reading.
Yeah, she did. She did. And I'm quite sure the older siblings were there, so they, my older sisters helped too. But I guess because of the knuckling and the hitting on the head, that memory sticks with you. Because she didn't just do that to me. When you talk to the other siblings, they'll tell you what she did. Now, with the older ones, I don't know how she taught them, but the ones closer in age to me, when we would talk about Ma and the knuckling, she did the same thing to them.
Now, when it came to Nana's ability with math, where did that come from?
She loved math. She wanted to be a mathematician when she finished school. She liked numbers. She liked math. Where that came from, as far as her parents' education, I don't know how far Mama and Papa went in school, but I know their children, the younger ones, I guess I could put it that way, they were encouraged to go to college. Now Genevieve and them, I don't think they went. I don't think
the older ones.
Genevieve, because Ma was the second oldest of 10. My grandparents had 10 kids. So she was the second oldest of the 10. Genevieve, I don't know if she had the capabilities of going on to school. I don't want to say she was dumb. I don't want to call her that because I don't know. But I don't think she had I don't want to call it tenacity. The yearning for learning the way my mother did. I think Genevieve, they just decided she would get married and stay home kind of thing. And then her older brothers, like Sammy and them, they didn't go to college, but her younger sisters all went to college. Now with Ma, she wanted to go to college to be a mathematician. Her mother wanted her to become something else. And so she married my father because she couldn't do what she wanted to do.
What did it mean to be a mathematician?
So that she could teach math. And she taught. When she got older, she taught in the school. Now the older siblings can tell you more about that as far as where the school was. But I know she did teach. She wanted to be a teacher. I think she wanted to teach math because she enjoyed it so much.
And so what do you mean that she didn't get to do what she wanted, so then she married?
She wanted to go to college to be a mathematician. Her mother wanted her to be a doctor. The way the story, I remember the story. Now you may get further clarification from the other one. Her mother wanted her to go to her brother in Philadelphia, which would have been my mother's uncle, because he was a doctor. And that's what she wanted for her. My mother didn't want to do that. She wanted to teach math. And so she married my father, which upset her mother. So that's what she did. So she never really fulfilled her dream, was to be a math teacher. She never did. So my mother was frustrated the majority of her life, I would say. She really was. That's not saying she wasn't happy, but I don't think she ever did what she was created. She didn't do what she was created to do. And that caused a lot of frustration and unhappiness in her life.
What, like, how do you remember the frustration playing out? Like, what's an example?
My mom was a trip at times. She really was. She would get angry easy if we didn't do what she wanted us to do. I don't know how to put this. There was just always an underlying anger with her. And
You were saying a level of anger.
always a level of anger and a level of sadness, I think, was always there underlying growing up. And I didn't know what it was until I got older, and had my own kids and everything like that. But I think it was, you know how you heard of unrequited love? I think it was just a dream of hers. I don't think her dream was to have 10 kids, and I'm not saying she didn't love us, but that's not what she had planned in her mind for her life. So her life did not turn out the way she wanted her life to turn out. And I think that's what that sadness was, and that anger that was there, because she never fully realized what she wanted to do.
Now, if her life didn't turn out the way that she wanted it to turn out, what do you think were some of the things that could have stopped her life from turning out the way that it went?
Well, back then, you have to remember that young ladies were under the control. Life back then was different than life is now. Now when girls finish, they'll move out of their parents' house at 18 and get a job and have their own place. That's not like it was in the 20s. And then, of course, you had the wars come along there. So it wasn't as if because she couldn't go to school, she could move out and go to school. That wasn't reality back in the in the 20s,
Mm-hmm.
30s. That's not how life was.
Mm-hmm.
So you did what your parents told you to do, or you got married and then you did what your husband told you to do,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. So her options, because she wasn't wealthy and white, there was no sending her to finishing school or off to Europe. Her options were limited
Mm-hmm.
as a female back in the 20s and the 30s. She was born in 1912.
Mm-hmm.
So her options, she wasn't a suffragette, yay, yay, rah, rah. That's not the way she was raised. And then, of course, her parents had younger kids after her, so she had to help with the care of the younger kids, too.
Mm-hmm.
So her dreams weren't able to be realized.
When you say that at that time period you as a woman did what your parents told you to do, and then you got married and then did what your husband told you to do, did you get the feeling growing up, even though this was decades later, that Nana did what your father told her to do? Was that that kind of dynamic?
No, it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't. Ma ruled that house.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that caused conflicts between her and Daddy because of her underlying anger and sadness that caused problems
Mm-hmm.
with them. It was a fight every weekend with
Mm-hmm.
the two of them, with the drinking, because Daddy drank and everything like that. So no, I don't. He wasn't the lorded over you the woman barefoot pregnant kind of thing. No, he wasn't that kind of person. My mother ran the house.
Mm-hmm.
Point blank, simple as that. She disciplined the kids. She took care of the house. The only time he got involved with the discipline was once the boys reached a certain age, she turned them over to him.
Mm-hmm.
And if we didn't do what she told us to do, and she told him, we didn't want that.
Who's we? The girls or all
The girl.
of you?
All of us when we were little.
Oh, okay.
We didn't want that. It wasn't, and she never said to us, wait till your daddy gets home. It wasn't that, because she took care of the discipline right then. It was swift and it was quick. There was
Mm-hmm.
no wait till your daddy get home. It was the belt, the shoe. Nana was going to take care of you right then and there. Mom was
Mm-hmm.
going to take care of you right then and there. But if he happened to be home and hear us being disrespectful, I remember one time she was in the kitchen and I was in another room and she called me. And you know how now kids say, huh? Yeah. I did that. He was in my face. You yelling at my wife? No, sir. I'm not yelling at your wife. When your mother calls you, you get up and you go to her. Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
So he made sure we all had the utmost respect
Mm-hmm.
for Ma. And he did too. That's not saying they didn't have their roles, because they did. But he made sure we as the children respected and honored her
Mm-hmm.
as our mother and as his wife.
And why do you think that is?
I guess because he loved her so much.
Mm-hmm.
He really did.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not saying he was perfect. He wasn't. And he did things that disrespected her. Now, of course, we heard things from her side. And when she's angry, you never know. The older kids may be able to tell you more about this. Because when I came along, the dynamics had changed quite a bit with them. But I guess it was just important to, I don't know if it was because when he was growing up, he was responsible for helping his mother and his sisters, and he was the only boy.
Mm-hmm.
But in the time that my father grew up, men respected women.
Mm-hmm.
Fathers respected their wife. They may have done other things outside the household, but when they were at home, you respected your mother, and your mother's word was law, and you listened to what your mother said, and you did what your mother said, kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing. So they grew up in a different era
Mm-hmm.
than kids today, or it's a different kind of respect. And he made sure we respected her.
If we can go back to when you were mentioning that the options for women were pretty limited, and because Nana was not rich and white, she couldn't go to a finishing school, for example. So what were, in your opinion, what were the options available to use? Like, follow your parents, follow what your husband said. So that's kind of one level of option. But what could...
I mean, she could have gone to school. She could have advanced in an education. But she had to do what her mother told her to do. So there were those options, but once again, it was what your parents told you to do, you had to do. There wasn't really any other options, I don't think. And you know, where they grew up in Georgetown, my grandparents were considered, I don't know, I guess they were considered upper middle class, if you want to call it. My grandfather was the first black postman in Georgetown. So that gave them a certain level of esteem in the community. So they had a certain, I don't want to say facade, but you know, a certain level of respect within the community that they had to adhere to. And then of course they were very light complected blacks, which added another level of prestige to who they were, because of his job and because of their skin color. So, you know, her options were, you do what your parents tell you to do. And she had the option of continuing on, but it was only with what her parents wanted her to do. They didn't hear what she wanted to do. Which is interesting because her younger siblings, Theopia, Matisse, they became teachers. And her two sisters, Thea and Matt, they married teachers. So it was all right for them to go into education, but I guess at the time my mother did it, her mother didn't see that as a future. I don't know why. And of course, there may have been other stuff going on that we were not privy to, because they didn't discuss everything the way everybody puts everything out now. Back then, a lot of stuff was not discussed. It was there under the surface. It was the elephant in the room, but nobody talked about it. So I'm quite sure there were other dynamics. And of course, we only heard Ma's side of it. We never asked Mama, why didn't you let Ma do that? That would have been disrespectful. So all we heard from was her point of view, and if her point of view was biased or not, I'm quite sure it was.
Well, how did you hear? How and when?
It's a story I always grew up with. So she talked about it. It wasn't a secret. So I've always known this. Now, whether it's gotten changed over the years, you know how when a story starts out at one end and ends up at the other end, and it's different than where it started. So I don't know whether there was changes, but I think the basic part of the story is true.
Did Nana ever tell you this story personally?
No. I heard it around the house. I'm quite sure it's from my siblings talking. I heard it. I don't ever remember her specifically saying to me that that's what she wanted to do. And she wasn't able to do it.
And you said that Nana had an uncle that was a doctor.
And I don't know him. It was her mother's brother. I don't know anything about him. Seemed to me like his name was Philip. But once again, one of the other siblings can tell you that. It seemed to me his name was Philip. And he was up north in Philadelphia. and he was a doctor.
Mhm.
Because of course up north, black had more opportunities than they did in the South back then. But I know nothing about him. Whether he was passing for white or not,
Mhm.
I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know anything about him.
Now, I will say that when you and Aunt Bernie were telling me about Nana, and just not the part about her being a teacher, because I knew about that, or wanting to be a teacher, but I didn't know that her mother wanted her to be a doctor. I didn't know that. And I didn't realize that so many of her sisters had gone to college, because that's not something you really hear about black people doing at that period of time. And so when it came to these stories that you heard, or just this idea of going to college back then for Nana's generation, did any of that, was it ever discussed as something weird or odd or abnormal, or it was just totally normal?
Well, you have to remember her siblings that went to college were of another, they were born in the late 20s and 30s.
Mhm.
They were born at a different time than Ma was born at 1912,
Mhm.
closer to the turn of the century. So they were born a decade later.
Mhm.
So I think ideas had changed, but no, it wasn't unusual back then for blacks to go to college, because there were black colleges set up specifically for them in the South. So it wasn't, I don't think it was unusual in the late 20s and early 30s for blacks to go to college. And most of them went to become educators. That's
Right.
where educators or nurses, that's usually what women did.
Mhm.
Most black women, there were no black doctors.
Mhm.
Female back then, I don't believe. Most of them were educators.
So then, what do you think about Nana's mother pushing her to be a doctor? Because I was thinking that, like, well, that's weird.
And I don't know if, well, now that I'm sitting here, I don't know whether she was using that as a ploy to get her away from my father.
Mhm.
It could have been that. I'll send her to Philadelphia, then she and Gerald won't be able to see each other.
Mhm.
So I don't know. That may have been just a ploy to get her away from Georgetown.
Mhm.
And if she went to Philly, that wasn't truly going to happen. I don't know. And maybe she knew that.
Mhm.
Because like I said, I never discussed that with her. And I don't know whether the other sibs did or not. But maybe she saw it for what it was, a ploy to get her away from my father. And she just married him to spite them. I don't know.
Do you think Nana is someone that would get married just to spite
Oh
her kid?
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And how long had she and your father been seeing each other? Like,
Well, I think they started dating when she was 16.
Mhm.
So that would have been, she was born 1912,
So 28. Mhm.
28. I think that's when they started dating. So she would have finished high school a year or so later,
Mhm.
you know, and
And he wasn't in school.
no. A lot of my father's younger years, now I think he was in the military for a little bit, but once again, one of the other siblings can give you more about his background. His I don't know a lot about when they were younger.
Mhm.
I know they ended up getting married in 1931. November of 1931, they ended up getting married.
Did they have a wedding?
I don't know.
Why do you think you don't know as much about your dad's? Because you know a lot about Nana's.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because it just wasn't discussed. You know, Mom discussed it because she was unhappy. I told you, when people are unhappy, they're going to tell you what they're unhappy about.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew she was unhappy about what happened when she was growing up. She knew, we knew she was unhappy that Genevieve didn't have to clean the house and she had to clean the house, and the time she burned herself on the stove. We knew all this because she was miserable, and she recounted every bad thing that had ever happened to her in her life. Where my dad was just, you know, kind of like Mal. And he took life as it came at him, and he dealt with it.
Mm-hmm.
Where she tended to wallow, and she could tell you everything that happened to her that she didn't like from the time she was a little girl up. up, up. She could tell you. If she was alive, she could tell you the time I made her mad when I moved out of the house in 1970-something. She could tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything negative that happened to her, she held on to it.
Mm-hmm.
And she nurtured it. And she opened the door and looked at it every so often because she didn't want to forget none of that. So that's how we know so much about her life, because she constantly talked about it. Where Daddy was
And so you don't know much about his life, not because he was hiding anything, but
No.
there was just not. He just never discussed it.
And I never thought to ask him. Now he may have discussed it with the older sibs, but I never thought to ask him because he was just Daddy. You know, go to work, come home, drink, argue. Go to work, come home, drink, argue. That was his life. Hang out on the stoop. Ma yelling downstairs at him because he's hanging out on the stoop. So that was his life. Very simple. Hers, you know, people not liking her in the building, her getting mad because they liked him and didn't like her. It was drama around Samina. It was constant drama, but Daddy was you know, that's why I love Miles being named after him. Because Miles has that same, you know, except when he goes off. You know, and when Daddy went off, it was everybody scattered. Mm-hmm. But he didn't do that often. Mm-hmm. And when he did it, it was because she provoked him. Mm-hmm. Because he was just, give me my alcohol, I'm fine, kind of thing. But she was a completely different person. So that's why I know so much about her.
But she did talk to you, like, even though she didn't talk to you directly about, like, the school situation, like the college situation, she did talk to you directly about lots of things, clearly, that happened in her life.
Yeah.
Did she talk to you about things that happened to her in school when she was younger?
No. Not that I remember any of that. I don't know. And you have to remember, a lot of times she was talking to other people, because back then kids were seen but not heard. Mm-hmm. So you sat there, and as long as you didn't say anything, they forget you were in there, so you heard stuff. Mm-hmm. Or you know, eavesdropping, which you shouldn't have been doing. But she didn't hide any of it. But no, I don't remember her ever talking about schooling and classwork, or you know, if she went to a one-room classroom. Seemed to me like she did, but I don't remember that. I don't remember her talking about that. The other sibs can tell you more. She talked about the actual school she went to.
What's something else that you can think of that you heard because you were a kid in the room and nobody was paying you any attention?
Well, about when she gave birth to Rocky, and you know, she almost had him in the toilet because she didn't realize what was going on at the time, because that was her first baby and she didn't understand. Mm-hmm. So I heard that, and of course I shouldn't have heard that being little. And so I remember that one. And I know, when they left down south, when Daddy came up north, and about the time that Vern came home from school and was talking about this, and Vern will tell you this story. This friend she had met, Betty Limes.
Mm-hmm.
And Mom was like, Betty Limes? Because they were the Limes.
Mm-hmm.
And she was trying to find out who this Limes child was, and she thought this was one of Daddy's kids he had out there, but come to find out it was another Limes that was related to them, an uncle or somebody. But she thought Daddy had been stepping out, and the chaos that caused in Georgetown. So, I heard about, because they were in Georgetown at the time. Yeah, because Vern was a little girl. So just about that, and how her mother found out about Uncle Priestley, who was her father's child, but not her mother's child.
Who?
So Papa had Uncle Priestley outside of the marriage, and how they found out about him, and that was one of the reasons. Mama was she was an unhappy woman too, and how they found out about Priestley being their brother, their half brother, and everything like that. So those were things that I just happened to overhear, being a child, that normally I wouldn't have heard, because that was adult conversation, and kids weren't allowed to hear adult conversation.
With the Betty Limes, what was the chaos that ensued in Georgetown?
Well, I guess she was going to find out who's Betty's mother. Where's this Betty's mother? She needs to find out who this Betty's mother is, and why is Gerald out there having children with other ladies, and she's home with her 4 kids, and yep. Well, once she finds out this Betty is not Gerald's, she's okay with that. So I can't even imagine the discussion between her and Daddy over Betty Limes, because I'm quite sure he's saying, Mina, that's not mine. Daddy, she's Limes, and I can only hear her. And Mina, she's not mine. Because that's how he was very, Mina, that's not. Mina, that's not. And when you hear him slam something, damn it! Oh, you know that she done pushed him too far. That's like that kid, mama, and you counting, because you know after a certain number of mamas, that kid needs to stop. And that kid goes, one mama too many. That's how it was with Daddy. You could go so far with him, and when he erupted. But she knew how far, but she kept going. Because when you're married to somebody that long, you know what buttons and how far they could go. So I don't know. I don't know why she pushed the way she did. Now, and I don't want to make it sound like she was a bad person. She wasn't. Because we used to have a lot of fun, and they loved each other. He would hold up her arms, and we tickled, because she was very ticklish. All he had to do was grab her arms, and she's like, stop it. And we just fall out laughing. So there was a lot of love, and a lot of laughter, and a lot of dancing, and a lot of playing growing up in our house. But, I guess today they would label Ma a manic depressive. I'm quite sure that's what they would label her. Because I remember one time she was making bread pudding, and she used to have this big Pyrex dish, because there were so many of us. And she was taking it out of the oven, and she dropped it. She never made us another bread pudding. Never made us another bread pudding.
Because she dropped it? But it wasn't anybody's fault.
She never made us another bread pudding. Stuff like that.
But why?
I don't know. And I don't know whether I heard the story that Lorenzo was in there, my cousin, and tickled her. So I one of the other ones will have to tell you if that's true. If Lorenzo caused her to drop it. But then why punish the rest of us? Because he caused you to drop the bread pudding. So stuff like that. So she never made. But I think they would label her bipolar or manic depressive in today's vernacular. Yeah. They would. Because she'd have highs and she'd have lows.
Now tell, because we're going to take back a little bit closer to not the present, but when you were older, you had mentioned that you were working at Merrill Lynch in high school and in college. When you started at high school, to me that just seems like a really, comparing it to high schoolers today, or even when I was in high school, that seems like a big job to have in high school.
I don't even know how I got that job in Merrill Lynch. I don't. Because I started, when I was first in high school, I worked at Lamston, which was like a Woolworth, a 5 and dime in the Village. So I worked in this store. And then I started working in Merrill Lynch. Kel, I can't even tell you how I got the job in Merrill Lynch. I don't remember. But after school, I would go there. Was I out of high school already? It seemed to me, maybe I had just graduated from high school when I started working for Merrill Lynch. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what it is. So I was in college. And I went to school during the day, and then I go down to Merrill Lynch at night, and we bagged up the stuff for the bonds and everything to be picked up. Because the carriers would come, Brinks and everything would come. So we did paperwork and stuff like that to get the bonds ready, get them packaged up for Brinks to come. So it was only a couple of hours per night that I did that. Because I went to college during the day, Bronx Community. And I would, my classes would be finished early. And then I'd go on down. So we came to work when everybody else that worked normal hours left. And it was up to us to get everything ready, packaging, for Brinks to come and pick up. Brinks and Wells Fargo used to come pick up the stocks and bonds. And that's what we did. It was me, another guy named Kurt, and there was one other person. I don't remember the other person's name. But we used to work there in the evening.
And you were still living at home?
I lived at home I was still living at home through Baruch. I didn't move out of my mom's house until I left college, and then I started working full-time at Merrill Lynch. Because at Baruch, I switched to nights, and I was working full-time during the day and taking classes at night. And it wasn't until Trey was born. How much older is Trey than you? I think 2 years. Yeah. So in 70, you were born in 79. So I think it was probably 77 I moved out of her house, and I graduated from high school in 71. So it was somewhere in there, 76, 77 was when I moved out of my mom's house. So yeah, I was still living there while I was working and going to school. And then when I stopped going to Baruch, I was just working at Merrill Lynch full time. And I worked at Merrill Lynch until I moved from New York in 78.
But you were doing something different by the time you were working there full time or during the day.
Yeah, I was working, I was handling, I was in the accounting department balancing the trades, balancing the books.
And how did you know how to do that?
I was taught.
On the job?
On the job training, yeah. I guess once I finished at Bronx Community, and I had started at Baruch, and I was still doing nights, And then, like I said, after I switched to Baruch night so I could work full time, because I guess this position came open. I don't remember it. This position came open and I applied for it in the accounting department. And so they taught me how to do it, and we had big ledgers. And what we did was balance the trades from the day before. You know, with a brokerage house, they trade stocks and bonds between each other. And the next day you got a ledger of all of the trades the night before, and you had to balance them to make sure the monies we received, let's say we traded bonds to I forgot the name of another brokerage house, and they send us a check. So we had to make sure that the check we received balanced with what we sent them. And that's what I did all day. We worked with these huge ledgers, balancing books. So I did accounting for Merrill Lynch.
But and you did go ahead.
Oh, and then I did various jobs, but it was mainly in the accounting department.
And you didn't need a degree to do that.
No. Back then, you didn't need a degree to do a lot of stuff. It was on-the-job training. So a lot of people that worked at Merrill Lynch did not have a degree. They came in, they applied, and if everything, back then things were so different with jobs. There was no background checks, there was no credit checks. You applied for a job, they interviewed you, if they liked you, they brought you in. And they trained you. If during the course of the job you didn't do it well, some places would then transfer you into another department to see maybe you fit better there. Other times they just let you go. So they trained you to do what you needed to do. And I remember when I took over just handling over the counter, and that's what they called those trades. Those were bonds that people actually came, picked up, or we sent a runner with them. And those were the ones I handled, just the over-the-counter ones. And we traded.
Okay, I just have a couple of more questions. And then okay, so you were talking about working at Merrill Lynch and then the process for hiring and firing and everything like that. Now, when you were working as a young person, I think doing fairly important things in a company at that time, was that expected of people your age?
I think so. It was commonplace. They hired young back then, because like I said, not everybody went to college. So they hired people straight out of high school, 18, 19. When I started there full time, I was older, because I had went through 3 years of college before I became full time there. But yeah, they hired people straight out of high school. Of course, they had older people that were there, so there was a mix. And they didn't just throw you in there. You always had older people working around you who had been doing it for years and years and years.
And at home, was it anything remarkable, or was it commonplace that you were doing this kind of work?
I don't know. I guess it was, nobody said anything to make it seem unusual that I was working for a brokerage house. And the people I worked with, they didn't seem, and I was the younger of the group that I hung around with, and none of them seemed like it was unusual for me to be there. I guess I was mature for 20. I don't know. I didn't give it much thought. But most of the people down on Wall Street, they were young business people.
And tell me a little about your college experience. So you talked about doing community college.
Yeah, I went to Bronx Community for 2 years because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So Ma suggested 2 years at Bronx Community, and I'd come out with a liberal arts degree. And then after that, I could transition into a 4-year once I decided what I wanted to do. So I go to college during the day and come home, and I remember my first semester at college, they had community rooms where people, lounges, I guess, and people hung out there between classes. Well, at the lounge, there was always a bid whist game going on. And my first semester, I almost failed out because I was playing bid whist instead of going to classes. So when I go up the stairs to go to my class and I look in and I see my friends playing cards, I'd go on in there. Now, because of my income, because we were getting Social Security, I was eligible for a Pell Grant. I was also eligible for a work stipend. So I did part-time work in, was I in the library? I don't remember where, a couple of hours in school. So I got a stipend check every month. And of course my books were paid for, my tuition was paid for, and everything like that. Plus I got paid to go to school. The Pell Grant paid for all of that. And then I got a work stipend because of my income. I applied for work study, I guess you want to call it that. So I got a check. So that first semester I almost failed because I was playing cards instead of going to school. And Ma said to me, I'm not sending you to school to play cards. So after that, I started going to my classes, and I would just play cards when I didn't have a class, as opposed to not going to my class to play cards. So I finished my 2 years at Bronx Community and graduated. So it was across the Bronx. We lived on one side of Bronx. The school was on the other.
But because by this time you had moved from where you grew up.
Yeah, because we had moved. Yeah. Back. We moved to the Bronx from Manhattan in. Was I still in high school? 71. I think I had a few more semesters. So we kind of split up where we were living, because Ma, they were supposed to tear down the houses we were living in. It wasn't until years later that they finally tore down those apartments on 116th Street. And we got the apartment in Castle Hill Projects. And it seemed to me like I was with Perry for a little bit while I was still going to school, because I would just go down. And Ma was staying, I don't know whether Ma was staying with Ronald, I don't remember that. But we were split up for a little bit. And then we moved into the apartment in the Bronx, and which Castle Hill was on the east side, and Bronx Community was on the west side of the Bronx. So I just took the bus across the Bronx and went to my classes during the day, and then just got on the bus and came on back home. So I did that for 2 years.
That seems like a big jump for you to go from, because in high school you did fairly well in high school, right? So it
With
seemed
my
like,
GPA, you mean?
right? So it seemed like a big jump to go from high school and then playing cards for your first semester of college.
Yeah.
Why was that such a?
I guess because with college you have that liberty. You know, like you used to teach your student, tell your students, nobody's on you in college to make you do your work. So I met a group of people. Because nobody I went to high school went to Bronx Community. They went to other colleges, but nobody I went to high school with was at Bronx Community. So I met a whole new group of friends, and they happened to be card playing friends. And we used to play bid whist at home, so I knew how to play bid whist. And so that's what happened. Yeah, I guess that was my rebellious period, because I wasn't a rebellious child. I went by the book, you know. And so when Mom gave me my Come to Jesus meeting, and it's not like she was paying for me to go to school. She wasn't. I had a Pell Grant, and the school was paying me to come. But when she told me, you're not going to college to play cards, you're going to get your education, and so I snapped too. And went back to school and finished up at Bronx Community. So
Now,
that was interesting.
how invested do you think or interested was Nana in your college experience otherwise?
I think she was interested.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, Sonia started, well, I guess my second semester in college. Because then Sonia came out of high school and she went into Medgar Evers. She went to Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, she was just, she was being Sonia. So a lot of the attention was drawn to her because she wasn't going to classes and she wasn't doing this and she wasn't doing that. So Ma didn't have to help me as much as she did in high school with my math and stuff like that. So it's not like she helped me with classes or anything like that. But you know, I don't remember us really having conversations regarding classes or how it was going or anything like that. I don't remember us having that conversation. She was at my graduation when I graduated from Bronx Community. And I know she helped me decide which 4-year I wanted to go to because of the major I wanted, psychology. There were certain schools that had certain things, and I could have gone to any 4-year college within the SUNY, the SUNY of CUNY, SUNY, the New York Community College System. I could have gone to any of the 4-year schools, but I picked Baruch on 23rd Street because I wanted psychology, and they had a good psychology program.
And so what was your experience like at Baruch?
It was different because there was a different type of student going to Baruch. A lot of the students were older. They came from different backgrounds coming into Baruch because it was a 4-year school to begin with. I could have went straight there. So it was different atmosphere than Bronx Community. And none of them was really a campus because they were both in the city. So at Bronx Community, the buildings were scattered in various places over in that section of the Bronx. And Baruch was on 23rd Street, so it was one building down on 23rd Street. So it was more of a commuter type school. You really didn't get involved, well, I didn't get involved in activities. It's not like they had frat houses or anything like that. People came to do their classes and then they went on and did whatever it was they had to do. I'm quite sure they had organizations you could have joined. I did become a member of the National Honor Society at the collegiate level because of my GPA, but I wasn't really involved in anything. I didn't join any clubs or anything like that. And then with my last year when I switched to nights, it was truly a different type of student coming at night because it was working professionals who were coming back at night to finish their education. So it was a different atmosphere.
Well, when you started out and said that there was that Baruch, there was the older students, what do you mean older?
Older age-wise. In the community college, most of the students there were just coming out of college. So you had a bunch of high school. So you had a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year-olds. At Baruch, you had some people there that were older in their but at Bronx Community, I met a girl, her name was Jerry, and she was an anomaly because she was married. She had 2 kids, and they lived in Parkchester, and she drove a stick shift car. So she was a foreign entity to me because none of the other people there were married or had kids. Like I said, we were young. But to meet this woman who was married and had children and had her own car, which was a stick shift, I admired her because I'm thinking, wow, she's back in school and she has this and that you didn't see a lot of women married with children in college at that time. Now it's normal.
Mm-hmm.
When I went back to Delaware State, I had YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
So it's normal. But back then, she was an anomaly. Most of the people in school were young singles.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't, or if they were married, they didn't have kids, kind of thing. So, but at Baruch, you had an older type. You had, people in their 20s, older 20s, mid 20s, going back for their education.
Okay.
They may be going to school in the day and working at night, kind of thing, or vice versa. Like when I started working full time during the day and I went at night, so it was a different atmosphere there.
And so then, how did you like it there?
I liked it fine because I enjoyed the classes.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed psychology and what I was learning. The atmosphere really didn't affect me one way or another.
Mm-hmm. And what years were?
I graduated from high school in 71, so I was at Bronx Community for 2 years. I did 2 years, so that takes me into what? 73? And then I went directly into Baruch. So I was at Baruch 74, half of 75 was when I dropped out, my last semester.
So tell me about the last semester.
The last semester because by then I was only taking my major, which was psych courses. And of course they get harder the further in you go. And by then I was just burned out of school. And I wasn't studying. I think I was thinking about work more than school because I could make money. And I was getting D's and whatnot. And I just knew, I couldn't graduate with the GPA that I was getting by that last semester. So that's when I made the decision to just stop because I wasn't getting anything out of it anymore. And I just decided to stop.
Was it just that semester that was bad, or?
Well, the semester leading up to my 4th year, that first semester in my 4th year was rough. And by the time it was time for me to register for the last semester, I couldn't do it because I knew my GPA was going down. I wasn't doing well in my classes at all.
And was there any involvement from Nana for that?
No, when I finally told her I wasn't going back, that's when, she got upset. Because I think she saw me, I was going to say pissing away my future, I don't want to say that, but just, she saw me giving up on my dream, like she had to give up on hers, I think. And that's when I made the promise to her that I would go back and get my degree. I told her, I promise you, I will go back and get my degree. And I did. But just at that point, emotionally, I just wasn't there. And I guess I didn't have anybody pushing me, encouraging me, saying I'll help you with it. It was me. And I just got tired.
Why was it just you?
Because at that time, it was just, it was Ma and Sonia and I in the house. That was all. So my siblings were all busy doing their own thing. And it was just us. It was just the 3 of us, And I don't know. That's the way it was.
So tell me about the decision to go back to school.
Because I had made that promise to Mom, I knew I would do it. And when y'all were little, and we lived in Delaware then, and I just knew I had to do it because I had promised her. And that was my motive, my motivation for going back. I knew I didn't want psychology. And another thing that helped me think about quitting was because by the time I was getting close to getting my 4-year degree and I was looking at the job market, for psychology and sociology majors, because it was flooded, you had to go on to get your master's. And I was not going to do that. There was no way I was going to do that. And so that helped make that determination. But by the time I decided it was time for me to go back, and I switched my major to business and accounting, because I know with a business administration major, you can get a job doing anything. And so, you know, when I got my transcripts from Baruch and everything, and I went to Dell State, and a lot of the classes I took my major, they were able to convert that over. And I found out at Dell State I only had to do 2 years. And so, you know, I went on back, and I was still eligible for Pell Grant and everything like that. So that's why. But my motivation for going back was because I promised my mother I would get a 4-year degree.
And so what was like the instigator for you to go back at that time that you did?
I guess because y'all were little, and I knew that was a good time, and I knew when y'all went back to school, when y'all started school, I would have to go to work. Whether your dad and I had broke up or not, I would have to go to work at that time, and I really did not have any marketable skills. There was no brokerage houses in Delaware that I could go work for, so I knew I needed something to help me land a job, and I didn't have anything because I was an academic.
Right.
You know, I wasn't secretarial or agricultural. I didn't have anything to help me get a job. And so I knew then I needed to get a degree with something so I could go to work.
And what year was that when you started at Dell State and you just did the 2 years?
I went back to Dell State. I want to say Jason was 18 months old is what I want to say. So he was born in 1980. So it would have been 81, maybe 82. Because I'm on the cover of one of Dell State's summer because I went summer and I went the whole year. And I'm on the cover of the summer of 84, I think, summer catalog. I'm standing there. I have to get that and show it to you. You remember seeing that? I have to get it and show it to you. I'm there with 2 of my other classmates on the front cover of this magazine, because that was the year I was a senior. And so that's what was your question?
So then you graduated in 84.
84, I think it was
That
84.
was your last year.
Yeah, I think it was 84.
And so did Nana come to your graduation?
No, she didn't come down. No.
So
y'all
what
were
was-
there. And Vern and Chauncey. I don't know whether Noble was there or Sadie. But I remember y'all being there. And that meant a lot to me.
Did you finish?
That I finished and y'all were there. Because y'all sacrificed. You didn't realize it. But there were times that y'all wanted me to play with you that I had to do homework. So because y'all were little, y'all didn't realize the sacrifice that y'all made. But y'all did. Y'all gave up some of me in order to complete that.
And what was Nana's reaction when you told her?
She was happy. Because I told her, I told you I would go back. She says, I was hoping you would. And I did. And since then, other siblings have gone back to get degrees.
Were you the first of your siblings to get a college degree?
I was the first one to go directly into college from high school.
And then the first one to get a...
Yeah, because I don't know, I don't know, I was the first one to get a 2-year. I don't know if Ted already had her nursing degree by the time I went back. I don't know, you know.
To get the 4-year degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you were having to do homework and everything like that, and me and Jason were there, was Dad around then?
Yeah, he was around when I first went back to school, because I started at night because he was working during the day. And so I started going to school at night, and he would keep y'all. So he was there. And it was when I got towards the end and taking a lot of my accounting that things really got difficult, because with the accounting, you really had to pay attention. And by the time I got to my accounting, I had switched to days. And y'all were in daycare. You know, y'all were Mrs. Slade. I don't know if you remember Mrs. Slade. So y'all sacrificed a lot of the time being home with me, because y'all were used to being home with me. It wasn't that y'all were there and I just shoved you in a corner somewhere. So my attention was divided that way. But my last semester, my last year, I think I was doing days, because a lot of the classes I needed, they didn't offer at night for my accounting. So I had to take those during the day.
And you didn't have a day job at that time?
No, I was home taking care of y'all. So I didn't go back to work until Jason went to kindergarten. And that's when I started working at Chase Manhattan Bank in Wilmington.
Was it expected at that time that you, because this was the early 80s, that you also stayed home when you had kids? Was that still an
That was
expectation?
normal. Yeah, that was a tradition.
Now and that was normal, switching back to Nana, that was normal at that time too, for her to not
be
work.
home. Yeah, yeah. Most mothers were, women did not really get into the workplace in force until World War II, when they needed them, when the men went off to war. When I was growing up, there were a couple of women on my floor that worked. Miss Wilson worked, but she was a single woman. Miss Burkell worked. She was a single mother. Her kids were grown. Miss Green worked. She was a single woman. My aunt Sadie worked. She was a domestic. My aunt Baby worked because she was a single parent. So the women that worked that I saw were all singles or single parents, and they had to work. The women that stayed home had husbands who went out to work. So if you were married, you were home with the kids. And because I don't think there was a welfare system and food stamps like it is now, where women just stayed home. Yeah, there was a system, because at some point my mother received welfare. But it's not like it is now.
Was that when she was?
That's, I think, before I was born. I don't remember that part, just hearing stories. I don't remember that part of it. Because when I was little, my father was, well, I guess when I was born or before I was born, he worked in the cleaners. He was a presser. So how much money they made, I don't know. So the older sibs can tell you about that.
But there is an understanding that Nana received welfare at some point.
Yeah, at some point she did.
But she
because I
wasn't-
don't think my father wanted her to get it, and she went behind his back and got it.
I see.
Because of course back then welfare was, that was a disgrace because you can't provide for your family kind of thing.
Right.
So it wasn't, what it is now to receive it back then.
But she wouldn't work though.
No, she didn't work. Now she was ready to go back to work when she found out she was pregnant with me, which was one of the reasons she had an issue with having me, was because TJ was 5 and he was going to school, and she figured now she could go back to work, I guess teaching or whatever, and then she didn't.
So what was the story, although I've heard it before, what's the story of that when she was thinking she could go back to work but not?
When she was thinking she could go back to work and she found out she was pregnant with me, when she had me, she wasn't going to bring me home. She was going to leave me in the hospital. And Verna told her, if you bring her home, she'll be my baby.
Mhm.
So they brought me home.
Mhm.
And it was a story I've heard all of my life that I never really thought about. I never really thought about the implications that had on me. Later on as I got older, and the Holy Spirit revealed stuff to me about how that impacted me, knowing in utero that I wasn't wanted. What a woman does outside, it does affect the baby, but of course you don't know that. That I wasn't wanted. And even though growing up I would say to her, look at that, you weren't going to bring me home, and I'm the best child you had, the best looking child, the one you loved the most. So it was always a running joke in our family, but I didn't realize the impact it had on me until probably 3 or 4 years ago, Kelly, when I really got the revelation of how that impacted my thinking and my pattern of life and my looking for acceptance, because I was rejected before I was even born. And then when I was 6 months old, she got pregnant with Sonia. Well, she was home with one. What difference did it make? But then 14 years later, my dad died. If she had not had Sonia and I, my mother would have died right after my dad. She would have. So when things happen and we
Is that
don't know
something
why,
that she said, or
no, that's
you
something
said,
I know, because she was ready to climb in the casket with Daddy. And that first year after he died, she stayed drunk the whole year, and she would have died of a broken heart. You hear people say that. She would have, hands down, because Sonia and I lived through that year with her. She would have died from a broken heart. So 14 years before, God knew what was going to happen 14 years later. And he knew in order for her to survive, she had to have a reason to live. And Sonia and I were there. So that's why she had me when she didn't want any more kids, because there was a purpose in it.
Now, when you would joke and say, "See, you didn't want to bring me home, and I'm the best looking," like, what was her reaction to your
She
joke?
would just laugh. It was a running joke my whole life with all of my siblings. I never thought about it. It was what it was. Emotionally, where she was at that, and I never held it against her, because emotionally where she was at that time, she didn't want any more kids. She had 8. There was other things she wanted to do with her life that she still never got a chance to do. So that was the second time. Now, between the first 4 and then the next 4, there was a 4-year gap. Did she feel that same way when she got pregnant with Perry? I don't know. After 4 years, did she figure, okay, I can go do something, and here she gets pregnant again? Was it Perry? Was it Ronald? Ronald was the next one. Did she feel that way when she got pregnant with Ronald after, Vern? I don't know. I never thought about it. I just thought about that just now, that there was gaps in between, because she didn't just have kids one right after the other. She had the 4, there was a gap, then 4, then a gap, and then us last 2. So did she feel, was this another time she was yet disappointed, because after the first 4, did she think, well, now I can go? And then they moved to New York when Ronald was a baby, so that was a transition. Of course, New York held more possibilities, but then after after Ronald came Perry, Terrell, TJ. 4 more, so she's home with 4 more, and then 5 years, and maybe then she figured, well, I'm still young, because she was 42. I can still go get a job, and then I come along. What a disappointment that was to her. And not that she didn't love me, and not that she didn't treat me any different. I never felt unloved. But I know it must have been a disappointment to her.
I think what's interesting is that there's still there's this idea, even in an era where it sounded like married women with children didn't work, that she was planning on working, and that she actually had worked before when she was a married woman. And so, why do you think that is? All right. I just have one more question, which is what I said last time. But you keep on.
I keep on talking.
I keep on thinking of new questions as you talk. But what I was saying before the tape cut us off was that Nana was planning on going back to work before she had you.
Mm-hmm.
And did she ever say that, or was that, like, how do you know that?
No. Yeah, she said it.
Oh,
because
she
that's
said it
part
to
of
you.
That's part of the story with her not wanting me. Yeah, because her plans were to go back to work.
And how did you know of this story?
She told me this story.
Oh, she's told you
Yeah,
that.
this one I've heard from her lips as well as other siblings' lips. Like, she didn't want you. This one I've heard from her lips. Never heard it from my dad, but did hear it from her. Just heard that when he came to the hospital, because the hospital they took her to, I was her only child born in the hospital, as a matter of fact.
Where was Aunt Sonia born?
At home.
Oh.
The 5 down south, the first 5 were born in the house, because that's what they did back then. In New York, Perry was born in a taxi on the way to the hospital. Ted was born in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. TJ was born at home. She made it to the hospital with me, and Sonia was born at home. She never told anybody she was pregnant. So it wasn't until she was in labor that they found out.
She never told anyone for any of her kids she was pregnant? What?
And her older kids didn't know when Sadie wanted to marry Melvin, she kept telling Sadie to wait. She wouldn't tell Sadie why. Sadie got married September 3rd, 1953. I was born September 19th, 1953. Sadie never knew she was pregnant. Because she never carried large, and then she wore oversized men's shirt around the house.
Oh,
Now, whether she bound herself up, I don't know. But they never knew until she was in labor that she was pregnant. So.
And she would wear men's shirts like this polo, that shirt.
Daddy shirts, big shirts.
Right. But your dad would know when she was pregnant, so he wouldn't be. So why didn't they tell anybody?
I don't know. Back then, people didn't talk about why Ma never. Now, she may have told Miss Wilson and Miss Green,
so she
didn't say her
adults,
kids.
But she didn't tell you guys that she was pregnant.
Well, didn't tell
she didn't tell them.
So I was the only one she made it to the hospital with. And when we got to the hospital, I think it was Sydenham, there was a diarrhea epidemic in the nursery. So they kept her there, but sent me to another hospital. So that's why on my birth certificate, it said I was a boy for 14 years. Because she didn't know what she had. They told her she had a boy. And they took me to another hospital. Well, when my father and, I don't know, I guess it was Vern. I thought it was Sadie. But one of the girls went, they found out I was a girl. And he came back and told her that I was the most beautiful baby she had had so far. She didn't care. That didn't work. She didn't care. She didn't care. So
but they didn't take you home that day. They just wanted to see you.
Yeah, they just wanted to see me because back then, baby stayed in the hospital. You stayed in the hospital a whole lot longer than they stay now.
Oh, okay.
You were in the hospital 7 days. So she never saw me until it was time for me to come home. She was just going to leave her there. I'm not taking her.
She didn't see you, meaning what?
Because we got out the hospital at the same time. So she'd never seen me.
But she gave birth to you.
Yeah, but back then, they didn't.
What do they do?
I don't know whether they knocked her out. I have no idea. But because of the epidemic, I didn't stay at the same hospital. So for her to believe she had a boy, that's telling me she never saw me to say I was a girl.
Mhm.
So they never put me in the nursery. They handle babies a whole lot differently than they do nowadays back then in 1953. So I'm believing, now I may be wrong, one of the other sibs, Vern may know more about this, that the first time she saw me was when Daddy went to the hospital and brought me home.
Mhm. Mhm. Was the hospital multiracial, like any?
No, it was in Harlem. So everybody in there was black.
The doctors.
The doctors
Well,
may have been white because there were white doctors and nurses, but the patients were black. They probably Latino. I don't know.
And what was the name of the hospital?
Sydenham.
Do you know if it's still there?
It's not there anymore. I don't know when Sydenham closed down because they ended up taking TJ. When TJ was born, they took him to Harlem Hospital, which is still there. Harlem Hospital was a teaching hospital, so that's still there. Sydenham and Metropolitan, those smaller hospitals. Hospital for Joint Diseases was a teaching hospital right on Madison Avenue. I don't know if that's still there. That's where nurses went to be trained. But Sydenham was just a hospital.
So going back to what I was asking before, so the story, so you know the story because you heard it because Nana told you this story, and the part of the story where she was planning on going back to work, and I'm also thinking about the story that Nana's mother wanted her to be a doctor, she wanted to be a teacher. When she was married, she was teaching. It sounds like there's this expectation of Nana to work.
I don't know if it was an expectation she placed on herself or other people did. That she placed on herself. I think for her, she's always wanted to teach. That's why she enjoyed teaching us. I don't think it was expected of her to do so. I think it's something she always wanted to do.
But she wanted to be a teacher.
Okay. She wanted to be a
because I'm just linking this to the kind of working outside of the home thing. Because it's not like, I assume that women had aspirations. Some of them had aspirations to work. Many of them had aspirations to do certain jobs. So Nana wanted to teach. And I know that, and I was raised with that idea, but I just thought it was interesting that it's not like her mom was saying, you just need to get married and stay home.
No. Her mother, from what I know, her mother never said that to her. And her younger siblings that taught, they were teachers and they had kids, but they still went to work. But like I said, it was a different time when they came along.
Right.
Even though Matt, those cousins are older than me, but then my mother had 10 kids. They only had 2.
Right.
So in the time, they are the same age as TJ and Terrell, so they're 66 and 65 now. A number of them are dead. They died early, so they're dead. But that's the age group that they fell into. So their parents were
Nana's
younger sisters.
And so you're talking about Nana's nieces are the same age as your older siblings. So
that middle group of siblings.
Right. And then, so those, for Nana's sisters, they were married and worked. And that was
teachers.
And so what does it mean? Or I just find it interesting that Nana came from a different generation, and then there was the expectation that she would work.
Be home with kids. No. The expectations of her generations is you get married, you have kids, you stay at home.
So then what does it mean that her mom
I think her mom wanted her to get away from my dad. That's what I think it was. I think that's what the whole Philadelphia thing
More
was.
than
So,
just wanting her daughter to
be
have
adopted,
a job.
yeah.
So it wasn't about the
No.
job, it was about getting away
the
from
more
that
I
guy.
think about it, I think it was just a means to an end, which was to get her away from my father. I think that's what it was. So if she went to Philadelphia, would she have truly become a doctor? I don't know, because I never discussed that with Mom. I don't know if one of the other sibs did, but I never discussed that with her. Whether she thought that would be a reality. Because I'm thinking, well, I'll go and tell him I want to go be a mathematician and see that's a lot cheaper than being a doctor. But she didn't even do that. So I don't know if she just thought her mother was lying. I have no idea. But I guess maybe because she was saying she wanted to be a mathematician, her mother's like, well, I'll tell you, do this, and that'll, satisfy what I want. So I don't know if she would have ever. I think with it being so deep within her, if by any means necessary, she would have gone on to school to become, or she would have been a math teacher without going to school. Because you didn't need a college degree right then to teach. So I think if at all possible, she would have taught math. She would have gone on and become a teacher and taught math. Because she didn't say she wanted to be a teacher. She wanted to be a mathematician, which is different.
Right.
She didn't want to teach English or arithmetic, history. She wanted to be a mathematician, which, to me, that's different than being a teacher. Maybe I don't know. And I never asked her, what does that mean to you, Mom, a mathematician? What does that mean? I just know she liked working with numbers. So she could have become an accountant. But back then, in the 1920s, options were somewhat limited for women. Like I said, once again, unless you were, if you lived in a larger city, but they lived in Georgetown, which is different than living in New York or Philadelphia, where there were more opportunities for women to work. Because I think even back then, the women that worked, they were domestics or secretaries for businessmen, and they definitely weren't black. You would not have a black woman sitting up in front of your office. I don't care how light complected with nice hair she had or not, she wouldn't be sitting up in the front of your office. I'm quite sure they didn't get jobs at banks. So what made her, I think for her, she wanted to teach math in a school.
Do you think, and that's something that she could have done in the North or the South, do you think?
She could have.
Do you think that she ever, just because this is something that I think about a lot, just with hearing about her life in the South versus her life in the North, do you think that there were ways that her life in the South was better?
I don't know. Her mother, who I also think was bipolar, or manic depressive, or an angry black woman. I think her life with her mother was, it was a hard life. Her mother blamed her a lot for her father's actions because she looked so much like her father. So her mother took out a lot of anger towards her father on Mom. And she didn't do that with the other kids, but she was named after her father and she looked like her father. So a lot of her mother, so I think her life growing up with Leola was a difficult life.
That's your name.
Yeah, it is. I was named after her.
Are there other ways? Her relationship with her mother made it hard, but I'm also thinking about things outside of her mom, like opportunities. Would you say that whether it's job opportunities, educational opportunities, do you think that there was an advantage in one place versus another for her?
I don't know, because when she lived, I'm thinking of pictures of my mother. They had a very active social life in the South, her and my father. Mm-hmm. They were part of various organizations. Mm-hmm. I remember one picture of her is she standing on the beach, mm-hmm. With a group of women, 10 or 12 women, and they all wearing white, mm-hmm. white shorts, tops, sneakers. And that she was a member of whatever that organization is. I don't remember what it was. But I don't, in Georgetown, she was part of a different culture, a different class, mm-hmm. because of who her father was and what her father did, and they were considered, I think, upper middle class or middle class. So I think there may have been more opportunities afforded her socially, mm-hmm. than in New York. Mm-hmm. Even though when they moved to New York, they were part of the Georgetownians, and so they were parts of organizations there. But I think it was a different class thing in Georgetown. Everybody knew who the Wilsons were. They were well regarded, well thought of. Mm-hmm. So socially, it was probably easier for her in the South. Mm-hmm. It may have been easier for her work-wise, too, mm-hmm. because there was a school. Mm-hmm. And you didn't need a degree to teach in the school, I don't think, back then when she came up. Mm-hmm. So there would have been an opportunity for her to work. And I think if she had gone that route, I wouldn't be sitting. Mm-hmm. She would not have had the 10 of us. She probably wouldn't have married my father. Mm-hmm. So things would have turned out different for us.
Mm-hmm. Had she taught, if she would have taught.
If she would have done what she wanted to do when she got out of high school.
Which is be the mathematician. And the mathematician.
Or even though she was seeing my father then, so there may have been a few of us. I don't know if there would have been 10 of us. Mm-hmm. But if she had gone on to realize her dream, mm-hmm. of being a mathematician, they probably would not have moved up north. Mm-hmm. But then I can't say that because they moved up because of economic times, mm-hmm. and hard times, and Dad, mm-hmm. went north. His sisters were north, mm-hmm. and they told him he could come north and there was more job opportunities. Mm-hmm. So during that time, a lot of blacks were migrating, the Great Migration, mm-hmm. up north. Mm-hmm. So they may have been a part of that. Mm-hmm. Or they may not have been. I don't.
Do you know what your dad did when they were in Georgetown?
No. The older sibs, no. Mm-hmm. I don't know what he did. I don't know what he did. And I think he worked in Sumter, but I don't remember exactly what he did in Sumter. But Vern would be able to tell. Mm-hmm. Like I said, he was just so I don't know.
Well, I thank you for this time. I know that there we'll be talking more because I'll develop more questions.
Yeah, as you talk to the other sibs, yeah, mm-hmm. you'll get more. And then you can fill me in on what they say because, like I said, there's blanks in there that I don't know. And mm-hmm. Vern has a mind like a steel trap, so she'll remember everything because she also has some anger and hurt issues regarding Samina, so some of that may bleed over into your conversation. But she was more privy to being the fourth child.
Mhm.
She was more privy to their younger years.
Mhm.
I was privy to their older
The older
years.
ones. Mhm. Did you have? Are there any questions or anything that you had for me?
No, nothing that I can think of.
Well, I hope what we're going to do and taping, working with tape. I'll figure out how to work it with the tape, but these are going to be kind of like possession of the family, so you guys will have access to each other's words. You know, whether it's recorded or
written.
transcripts. The transcripts might look a little bit funny. I think I showed you an example
Yeah, you
before where
did.
they're going to kind of look like that, but maybe I'll try to get a copy just of the straight words and not all of the markings that show the break in time or how we talk over each other. But you guys will be able, everybody will be able to see, because I would like for us to preserve that some kind of, some kind of
Bound
way.
in
And
a
we have
book
time.
somehow.
Yeah, we have time to figure out exactly how that's going to work. But if it's going to be archived, just what's going to come from it. So, yes. But thank you.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it. You brought back some memories that I had forgotten and caused me to think about some things that I hadn't thought of.
Mhm.
As to the why things happen.
Mhm.
I just always knew they happened, but never really thought about what caused it to happen.
Mhm.
So, yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. We're going to keep on doing this.
Okie dokie.